Hey, welcome to the show, everybody. This is the Leadership Toolkit. My name is Mike. I'll be your host on this journey this afternoon. I'm super excited. As you know, every Wednesday we get together and we have a conversation on how you can grow. We talk to leaders from multiple different industries so that you can learn from their successes, you can learn from their failures or setbacks, and you can get yourself growing and grow the people that are around you. So I am super excited today to talk with my new friend, Dan Capello. Dan is a leadership speaker and trainer. He was trapped in a life that did not fit him. He was trapped in a body that did not fit him and topping out just over 300 pounds. His journey started with a loss of 70 pounds, started running a Spartan race. And today, Dan helps other leaders and people just like him to recover from burnout and discover what really drives them and moves them forward in that leadership arena. So I'm excited to introduce to you today, Mr. Dan Capello. Dan, welcome to the show, man.
Thanks, man. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So I'm really excited to have a conversation with you and talk about your journey. I think a couple of things you brought up in the email or just that we exchanged are going to be awesome and really valuable for our audience. What I'd like to start with, though, if people are not familiar with you, you just had a book come out in February. You've had quite a journey. You're a very inspirational person from speaking with you. So I'd like to just have you take a couple minutes and introduce who you are, what's your background, what's the part of your leadership journey, and then let's get into having a conversation today, man.
Well, thanks. So I've been a chef for 30 years, and it's mostly been at high-end country clubs. And to be able to get those jobs and to move up in the country clubs, you had to have, that's successful when you get to be able to do that. And that's what I felt that was my success, was being able to be an executive chef at a high-end country club. And I
Sure.
worked at many of them. But the other part of that is, at country clubs, there's always something going on. And it's like you get burnt out for the holiday season, then you come back, recover, and then you're right back into whatever rodeo season and then wedding season and then the summer, and it's just nonstop. And we're never home. So it's almost like later on, I actually felt it was taking the time that I promised to my family and just cashing it in for my personal success and a paycheck.
Sure.
So, yeah.
So that's it in a nutshell. So let me ask you, so you had been doing that for 30 years. You've now started to transition for partly because you were at that upper echelon. You're at the top of leadership. You're in the top of the game in that chef arena. What was it that made you decide to make the transition and say, hey, look, you know what? I'm fried on this. Was it just being burnt out? Was there something that, like the straw that broke the camel's back, so to speak? What was it that you said, I got to get out of this and make a change?
Right. Well, in the food industry, it's like, as a chef, it's like almost like a badge of honor. It's like, burnout. It's like, I work 60 hours. It's like, wow, you're working part-time? What? So,
Oh gosh. Yeah, I've heard that before.
yeah, but it's very, very brutal. It's mentally and then physically taxing. I mean, it's a lot of, you're moving tons of food, but there's that one moment. It's like, I looked at a picture and it was at my best friend's wedding, and I was like, who is that? Because I was 300 pounds. I was like, you don't ever see yourself grow to be 300 pounds. It's like,
Sure.
all of a sudden you wake up one day and you're like, damn. And I was like, man, I got to do something about this because I'm going to die like this. And I've seen lots of chefs just have heart attacks and die. And it happens. It happens to all of us. It's our standard American diet creates a standard American diseases, and we have the standard
Sure.
American funeral. And then,
Well, I was just gonna say, the thing that, and I've been there. It's hard, man. I know exactly what you're talking about because I got very sick a couple of years ago, and then you come out of it, and in your mind, you're still that same person. Like in my mind, there's lots of times I'm still that 17-year-old kid, right? I got all the fire and that kind of stuff, but then all of a sudden on that outside, it just creeps up on you. It's like they say, boiling the frog, right? When you see yourself in photos, all of a sudden you're almost seeing yourself through somebody else's eyes, and I think that's something that is it's a very, very powerful realization, just like what you're sharing here.
Right. And then at that moment, it's like, so I've had dyslexia for forever, and I didn't know why. But so I never really read books on self-help, and then I found Audible, and
Okay.
that changed my life. I mean, I've got over 100 books in now in 5 years, and one of the first books I listened to was David Goggins, and it was about that time in 2018, the end
Hmm.
of 18 in December, and I listened to that book, and I was like, man, I'm gonna run a Spartan race. And at 300 pounds, he's like, who does that? It's like I'm gonna do it. And so that was my motivation, was to listen to that and go hiking and do all that. And I lost 70 pounds and at, over 50 years old, and I ran a Spartan race. I didn't walk it, I ran it. And it was great. I beat myself up. I caused injuries, but I made it
Sure.
all through. It was great. And that's, you know, at that point, I thought, oh, I'm good. You lost the weight, you're in good shape and all this. And then that mental beast woke up inside. And it's just like I ran into that mental wall of my mental health problems. And that,
No, I hear that. And for if anybody's listening to the podcast later, or if you're watching right now, I think what you're referring to is the book by David Goggins, Can't Hurt Me.
yes.
And super inspirational book. It's not for everyone. I will warn you. It's got some colorful language, but here's one of the things. So you listened to that on Audible. Did you listen to that on
Hmm.
Audible?
Yeah.
So that is so much more, in my opinion, so much more powerful than reading it for yourself, because the guy sets it up on like a podcast interview, and he interviews Goggins over like 3 days while they're reading the book. So you get the extra excerpts. Did you get that
Oh
version
yeah,
or
no, and
whatnot?
that was the great part. After every chapter, it's like, all right, hey David, we just
Yeah.
read this. This is crazy. And
Yeah.
you're in the mountains of whatever, North Carolina, and doing all this, and
Yeah.
what was going through your head. And it's like that whole thing is like, he tells you about it, about stealing souls. And it all goes back to being abused as a child. And I fell into that because I was, he was almost 300 pounds, and I was in the Air Force. But it was that point where it's like he talks about his trauma
Hmm.
and the mental parts of it, and how he had dyslexia and all this other stuff. And that's when, after I did the race, that's the part I ran into, was the mental part. And it basically easily be classified as mental health problem. I
Sure.
could have easily been, actually people wanted me to go see a shrink, but I was like, no, I don't, men don't do that. But
That's That's an interesting state. We're going to talk about that here for a minute too. But before we get too far into this, because I mentioned you have a book out now also, um, and the title of this book is, I think, awesome. It just came out in February, called Deliberate Evolution. And so for anybody that wants to check out Dan's book, and we'll bring this up throughout the show, but you can go to tinyurl.com/deliberate dash evolution, spelled just how it sounds. Can you tell us a little bit about the book? What was the inspiration? How did you start moving into that? I mean, does it carry your whole journey from chef to leadership burnout coach, or what officially do you title yourself, Dan? Let me ask you that.
well, I'm a servant leader. I'm here to help
Okay.
people now. So when I
Love it.
ran into my problems, the mental part of it, I actually was drawn to a book. It's called "The Body Keeps Score," and it's by Bessel van der Kolk, and he's a childhood trauma expert. Well, it brought me back to when I was 6, to my sexual trauma that I had when I was 6, that I totally blocked out.
Mm,
And when I figured that out, I figured out my ground zero, where all my problems started coming from. My first coping mechanism of food. So I grew very rapidly, and I was very awkward. So I wasn't into sports. I played the sports because that's what my parents want me to in. But I was the last one being picked because I was big, I was awkward. And but a lot of those problems that I ran into, like the dyslexia, I ended up with a speech impediment when I was 6, and it took 3 years to get out of that, and nobody knew why. I didn't really realize it. And between all this and the dyslexia, the learning issues, that's all that is tied right back to that one moment of trauma. And then I was a out of control little kid because nobody could understand me and I couldn't understand me. So I got beat all the time. I got beat at home and at school. Back when I was in school, there was corporal punishment. So I was in the
Sure.
office getting licks. I was in the gym getting licks. So I was constantly being, you know, bombarded with all this. You know, you're not being who we want you to be. And it's like you're crying for help, but you don't know how to cry for help. And so that going through all that and going back and trying to figure that out, you know, it took me a while to get from that because I don't allow people to speak to my life at that point, except through a
Hmm.
book. So, you know, I did Jung and Maslow and, you know, the attachment theory. I went through the shadow, all that stuff and figured out exactly what happened, where it all occurred and how to get out of it and slowly pulled myself out. And that was in 2019.
Wow.
So that's where I was like, when I figured that out, the ground zero and all that, it's like, I need to help people because there's millions and millions of people walking around like me that are leaders. We got there because we were driven to prove somebody wrong or to prove we were good enough or to prove, you know, anything because of something that happened when we were a child. We're controlled by what happened as a child, that event defined who we are in our life. And sometimes we go to our grave and we don't figure out what how it defined our life and
Hmm.
but also how can we interpret it and control it to our advantage instead of because you know I would get so to a certain point and I would get bored and I would create my own problems as a leader and you know then I would go to another club because I would get bored and it's like, okay, well, I built this one up and I could have stayed there. I probably should have, but I just, okay, I'm gonna go do another club because I was
Hmm.
constantly running from myself. And the problem is everywhere I went, there I was.
So that leads us into so it was sort of a fear of success. So that was your own limiting belief. One of the things you brought up was, having a conversation on sort of limiting beliefs and fear. And
Hmm.
so would you say that first off, let's define it for somebody, because I know a lot of times we'll hear, I'm big in the personal development space. You said that was something that really unleashed you. How do you define a limiting belief for somebody that's listening or watching? What is a limiting belief when we refer to it?
Well, that's like, I'm not good enough for that person. So you sabotage it. Or you're like, I don't deserve this because I'm me, you know,
Hmm.
because the way I think or what I do behind closed doors, I don't deserve something. So I'm gonna limit myself. But your brain does it, and you don't do it yourself. Your subconscious does it to protect you because you feel that you're not good enough, that you're not worthy, and so your brain your subconscious protects you, and that's what it thinks about you protecting you. But the problem is that glass ceiling. That's when people
Hmm.
talk about breaking the glass ceiling. It's realizing it's like the only person that's holding me back is me. It's my thoughts. It's my perception of who I am because my perception of myself is skewed. And
Well,
it
and I think there's something to be said for, because you said, hey, it's, like our subconscious protecting us. But the reality is it's not really protecting us. It's this weird dichotomy, right? Of like, well, I am protecting you, but it's not really protecting you. I had a mentor one time, and we were talking about this exact thing, talking about limiting beliefs. And he'd asked me a question. Well, what are some of the things you never want to go through? And I was very young, and at the time, my dad, who I love dearly, have a lot of respect for, one of the things that I found out as I got older was he had been through bankruptcy at one point. And I thought to myself, I never want to go through that. And they're like, well, why is that even a concern? Like, who made that rule for you? Right. And it's because of something else I had seen in my life and it impressed on me. And so that was weighing in the back of my head. And ultimately, one of the weird things, it's just like what you're saying. One of these weird things was then it was like, well, I can't take on these other tasks, or I can't, mismanage my money this way. But because of that, I wasn't even using money as a tool that it is meant to be used for, because it was like, I got to protect this thing that's never gonna happen, right? For myself. So, but it was because of something else that I saw. So, and I just remember this mentor of mine looking at me and he goes, well, that's stupid. Who made that rule? I'm like, this guy. So I think it's really valuable. So when you're talking about like limiting beliefs and fear, and you've mentioned ground zero a couple of times, let me ask you, because I always like to try and give some tangibles for people if they're jotting stuff down. How did you, what are some tasks or some things that you went through, a couple or three things that you said, okay, well, this is what allowed me to find what my limiting beliefs were for myself. Did you end up speaking to a counselor or a shrink, as you called it, or was it part of your own personal journey? How did you start to find those things for yourself?
Well, I didn't actually. I did talk to a lady like a couple months ago, but that was up to that point, and it was about clearing those past memories.
Okay.
Creating a positive memory over that memory, and
Sure.
but it was all going through the books and figuring out what everything done, because your self-limiting beliefs 200 years ago, we could have died by being eaten by an animal or whatever, got in a fight, hit, stepped on a nail and died very quickly and painfully.
Mm-hmm.
And evolution and technology has happened so rapidly in the past 200 years that our brain, we still have our reactive brain, our subconscious, that protects us, and
Sure.
that's what protects us. But now it's protecting us from things that are not real. It's not protecting us from a saber-toothed tiger or a grizzly bear or falling off the cliff or all these other things that would have ended our life immediately. Now we don't have any of those problems. The things that are killing us now is what we eat and what we think. It, it's
Mm-hmm.
it's not it's not that. And our brain, we haven't evolved past that. So we have those limiting beliefs that, like I said, protected us in the old days, but now it's trying to do it doesn't have anything to do. So it's creating its own problems. And for me to figure out what my limiting beliefs were, I actually had to figure out I, what made me tick, my purpose, as they call it, like your origin story. Because everybody, you rejection overcomer, a trauma survivor, um, all these other things. And it gives you certain tools that you can use later if you choose it. It gives you almost superpowers. And I don't mean that in, discounting what happened to us, but it gives us a power that most people don't have. And like, I always hid my feelings. And because one of my things about when you overcome your like sexual trauma and stuff is you have empathy for people. And I had no empathy at all because I totally shut it down. But to learn the empathy part, then it just start opening up all these other feelings, which I suppressed because that's what you do as a man, supposedly. But to get to where I was or where I'm at now is actually realizing that there is no saber-tooth tiger, that everything that I've created saying I'm not good enough is me. And for me not to be the worst person in the room with myself, it's that relationship with yourself where you actually perceive yourself as someone who's worthy of care, of it, because we treat ourselves worse than we treat someone we love. I
Sure.
mean, like Jordan Peterson said, you need to treat yourself like you're in charge of your care of someone you love. And we
Mm-hmm.
don't do that to ourselves. We beat ourselves up, we self-care, we don't do it, we don't eat properly. But the person, our child, we're going to go, don't eat that or
Mm-hmm.
don't do this, but we won't do it to ourselves.
Yeah, it's an interesting twist, and it might have been Jordan Peterson. I brought up on the show a couple weeks ago, because it is interesting. Like the person we have the most conversations with is ourselves. We're constantly going through this and we're talking to ourselves and so forth. And I remember same mentor that told me, he says, when you're having a conversation with yourself, you need to be kind and set yourself up for wins. Look at what you're really saying. What are you really saying to yourself? And one of the things that you brought up here too is where we're talking about fears. Do you have some advice you could offer to people? Well, first off, I think a lot of people from the outside, they look at leaders and we're inundated with it on the internet, where people are like, oh, you got to take that risk. You got to do that thing that you're scared of. Everything that you want is just on the other side of that fear wall, right? You hear all of these things that we're often bombarded with, especially if you're seeking personal development. I think that's something that you look at somebody speaking on stage or somebody like yourself, Dan, and go, well, yeah, easy for you to say, like, you're the guy that's up there doing it. I think there's this, I don't even know how to word it, but there's this view that leaders, not necessarily managers in business, but people that are in leadership roles don't experience fear. But even now, do you still experience fear of things? Because you were saying, hey, overcoming fear and trauma, do you still have fears? And if you do,
yeah.
okay. So when fear creeps in, how do you overcome that where you sit right now?
A lot of times what we fear is what we don't know. So
Okay.
if you fear you're going to fail at something, it's like, but what's really going to happen? It is, there's that certain point where you have to reach to where it's like, I'm afraid to go speak on the stage. It's like, why? You have to reevaluate. Like the first time I went and talked on stage, I totally triggered myself, and I could feel the cortisol. I could feel my vision. I could was blurring, and I couldn't read my thing and my notes, and then I got jumbled, and it was a train wreck. And sorry for the people that brought me in, but when you first start doing this stuff, I'm not a public speaker. I never was, but I was a chef. So, had to take that. And it's like, okay, why would I be fearful of doing that? It's like, well, because what people are going to think of me. It's like, but is it really what they think of you, or it's what you think they're going to think of you? And at the end of the day, it's like, if you can reframe it to where, what are they going to think? It's like, okay, if I don't go help this person, someone else may help them that doesn't know as much as I do. If I don't go up there and address this fear, somebody's going to be unserved. They're not going to get the information. They're not, what I have is valuable. And I have to value that to come to the realization that what I have to share, my experiences, are valuable to someone. And if I can get up there and get over my fear and all that, then, and get in the mindset of, I'm here to help someone. What can I do to improve my performance so that I can communicate better, so I can help someone? Because if I can't communicate, it doesn't matter what I know. It's
absolutely.
Yeah. Without you could be a 10 on 10 on knowledge and experience, but if you can't get it out of your head in front of people in a cognitive and empathetic way, nobody cares.
I think that's really powerful. I think something that you pointed out, it's not what people are going to think of you. And anybody in a leadership role, you need to know this right now, because it doesn't matter if you're leading a team of 3 people, 30 people, 300, you're speaking in front of a audience of thousands. It is not what those people are going to think of you. It's important to have the knowledge. I think you nailed it, Dan, that you have to be able to articulate that so that you're able to get it out and communicate with them. But don't let what you think that people are going to think of you, don't allow that to prevent you from sharing what it is that that valuable piece of information. It's just like almost a year ago now, when I was restarting this show, one of my friends said to me, he goes, dude, you've got a gift. You need to go talk to people because that message needs to get out there. And so it's like, even beforehand, when you and I are talking, it's like, listen, we just want to provide value to the people that are tuned in and watching. And if one person is affected positively by that, like that's the goal. We so often look at it and have these visions of, well, there's going to be 500 people in an audience or 1,000 people in an audience, and right, but you have to remember in leadership, and you've just said so much valuable stuff, Dan, that like that servant leader is, that's great that you're going to share the message with 500, but how are you affecting the one? I think that's something that's really important to lean in on. And we have all these cliches, right? Fear stands for false evidence appearing real, or forget everything and rise, or all this stuff. But the reality is, one of the things I've found when it comes to fear is, and I'll give this tip to anybody, because when you start putting content out there, when you start speaking on stage, when you start leading groups of other people, regardless of the size. If you're a content creator that says, well, I'm going to go on YouTube, but I'm worried about what other people are going to think, I'll give everybody a tip, and Dan, you'll probably agree with me on this. People are not thinking of you as much as you think they're thinking of you. You want them to be, right? Sometimes, but the reality is you gotta bring that value. That's how you affect people. Agreed?
Oh yeah. I mean, it's like Alex Hermosi says, fear is a mile wide and an inch deep, and you just got to walk through it.
Absolutely.
And it's like, I still have those moments. I still have my limiting beliefs. I'm not perfect. I'm sitting here trying to create a business to help people. And, I get rejected a lot, and failure is every single day. And it's like, you got to get back up and dust yourself off and be like, okay, that person wasn't the person, or, they weren't rejecting me. They just don't know me, or they're rejecting what, it's not personal. They have a job to do, and it's like, I don't fit their criteria or whatever, but it doesn't mean I stop. It's like, you have to fail enough times to where you actually find out what success looks like, but you have to define success before you can look for it. It's like, we don't define success for ourselves.
So let me ask you that. I was going to ask this other question, because I was going to say, hey, how do you deal with rejection? I want to point this out with people, because I think you said it, and it was just in passing. So I want to slow people down, because I do like people, especially if you're listening on the audio version later. The fact is, like you said, you're talking about, hey, I've failed, I've been rejected. We all go through that. And I think some people really hang on that and take it personal. I think one of the key things that you said here that's super valuable is just, and write that down, it's not personal. You may not be the right fit, may not be the right product, may not be the right timing, right? There's all kinds of other reasons, but it's business. It's never personal. I'm curious, what's the process you go through? Or, is it 2, 3, 4, 5 steps, or what do you go through? Because you said, I don't think enough people define success. I think people think they define success. They go, well, I want this thing. Right, I want this, and they call it good. But how do you actually go through the process, Dan, as a leader, of how do you define success?
Well, success is not a dollar figure. It's not a position. It's you as a person. What do you ultimately want to be? And a lot of people's like, I want to be a doctor. I want to be this. It's like, no. What do you want to be as far as helping people? Because your purpose is what you have to help others. And a lot of people go unfulfilled because they don't use their purpose, because fulfillment comes from using your purpose to help others. And until you can figure out that one goal and separate yourself from it's all about me, to where it's all about others. Because when you make it about others, that's where we are as humans. We're here to help others and not be self-serving We need to be servants. And until we can do that and find our goal, and it's a lot of times I tell people, it's like your North Star is your success. And it's not that you're going to make it to that point. That's not success. The success is who you have to become to get to that point, or to move in that. Every time I have to learn something new about my business or speaking or communicating, because I if I can't do that and keep moving forward in my journey, it's like the biggest thing that you're going to find is your detours, where you have to, like that fork in the road where you think, it's not working, I'm gonna have to go this way. You go that way and you find the key that you didn't know you needed for the door that you haven't reached yet. And
Interesting.
that's the whole point. And then you get back on your course. It's just like taking a trip. So success is actually becoming the person who can do what you want to do. Because at the end of the day, if I was like, I want to be able to make $1 million, or I want $1 million, it's like, it's not the $1 million that matters, because you can do it again if you became the person that can earn $1 million. They can take the million away. It's like, it's okay. I did it once. I can do it again. I'm that person, not I have that thing. And, when we start separating success from a physical thing and put it into a personal, to your persona, your, I almost metaphysical you as your soul, that person, that's, because a great leader is empathetic. We've all worked for people that are micromanagers, self-serving. They're all about the numbers. And Richard Branson said, I still quote him. He's like, I don't worry about my customer. I worry about my people, because if I take care of my team, they're going to take care of my customer better than if I worry about them. And that's the whole point. I can't, if I'm a leader of a big corporation, I'm not touching everything. I'm not doing everything. But if I can give the vibe or the feeling that those people are part of me, that I care about them and I want them to succeed, and I give them the tools to be successful in their job, then I create a relationship to where they'll do anything for me. But if I have to force them, and I'm that, that butthead chef, and I've done that, driving, we used to joke about driving square pegs into round holes. And that's what we did. And it wasn't kind. It wasn't nice. It wasn't empathetic. And we constantly had to fight for it. But when you stop that, and it's like, what do you want? I mean, if you're not good in this position, maybe you can do this one, or you work with your people to make them the best that they can be. And they're going to give you the best through giving whatever service they provide or talking to your customers. And that's what's going to make the corporation or the business or the restaurant successful, is not that you did it. It's that you took care of people and they did it.
Yep. And then it becomes that we did it. I think one of the things that you pointed out that's also just as we're talking here, and from what I've known of you, you're saying, hey, I'm trying to force this square peg through a round hole. Like, that's tiresome. That's one of the things in leadership, that is something that leads to burnout. So if you're not invested, and I love that quote, I agree with you, from Richard Branson. If you're not investing in those people, if you're not growing them, if you're not running alongside them and learning what makes them tick, you're going to keep exhausting yourself trying to force them through something that is emotionless. And I think that's one of the things, where you were saying, hey, I got burnt out on this. I mean, and part of it is, correct me if I'm wrong on this, I think part of it is we mirror what we see, like what we came up in. We mirror, you've commented several times, well, men don't do that. Some of that is probably based on the men you see in your life. It's like when we get into our first management role, you get to be an assistant manager. Well, who do you emulate? The last assistant manager that was there, and they're not there, maybe they got promoted into management, but a lot of times they got moved out, and then you're emulating the person that's no longer there. Same thing with management. So we get moved along into these roles, without any definitive, hey, here's the guardrails, here's the processes and the procedures that you need to do to be a successful leader. So we emulate what we think success looks like because that other person had a title.
Oh yeah. No, I mean, I the people like chefs I work for some very direct chefs, and the way that they train me, the way that they treated me is like you said, is the way I treated people. So I pass down the trauma,
Mm-hmm.
or not the trauma, the or whatever it was, because it was all in a kitchen. It's everybody's thinking, oh, it's all nice. It's like, no, it's very cutthroat in the higher end kitchens. It's very cutthroat. It's very competitive. And, you're in these environments that, it's basically a shark pit and everybody's a shark. And it's like eat or be eaten. And but that's not all the kitchens, but that was the kitchens that I started in. But then also I worked for a chef who was the totally opposite. He was the calm, cool guy. He was there to help. He was into growing people. And it was night and day. When I saw that, I was like, wait a second, there's something here between, very direct, chef, and then this other one who's very people oriented, very calm, very, it's that whole thing. It's like, instead of, if you don't do this, you'll get this, instead of, or you're not doing this, so you're going to get this. And that's one of the problems I saw in HR, because in my first part of my career, I was difficult to handle. And, later on they go, wow, you're really good with HR. And it's like, the reason I'm good with HR, because I spent a lot of time in HR as a young cook.
Because I was bad at HR.
Well, because I was difficult. And that's
right.
One of the things when I go back to that ground zero, what that created is that created a difficult person into my adult life. So I was still having the trigger moments and all this, and still going back to that same trauma as an adult whenever I was stressed. So
we go back to what we know.
Yeah. But a lot of it's people won't let you, like HR will, okay, you got 3 strikes, you're fired. Mm-hmm. Instead of, you're doing this and all this. Are you okay? Are you, and they don't approach it as you're a person. They approach it from the HR, very black and white. And it's, like Simon Sinek says, you miss your numbers for the first quarter, for the last 4 quarters. If you do it again, you won't be working here. Instead of, you missed your last numbers again this past quarter. Are you okay? Is there something I need to know? What can I help you with? Because you're not the same person. Something's wrong, and I want to help you. And I never got that coming through growing up into my kitchens.
Sure. Well, what's interesting is you're not the first person to say that on this show. Like that's becoming a more and more common theme. I've heard it from Simon Sinek. I've heard, you're just now saying it and such. And I think that there is a defining line too. Like if we're talking to somebody in business that's or a follower or somebody working for us, we want to make sure it's somebody that's been performing, because if you have somebody that you brought in, you're connected with them, they've been performing, and all of a sudden something's off. That's different than we hired someone, we brought them in, and they've never performed. Right. And one of the hard parts for leadership is, I think a lot of times, we're invested as soon as we, in management or leadership, we're invested. We hire somebody, we bring them in. And if they're not producing or they're not performing, one of the hard pills to swallow is the fact that we as a leader have to say we made a mistake. And I think oftentimes people are they have a tough time saying that. And so I just want to differentiate that sort of definition. Is it's like, because somebody may be completely in the wrong position, they may not be the right fit. There are people that just aren't good employees. But I think what you're saying is, if it's somebody that they are good, or they have performed, and there's something amiss, it's more valuable to view them as that human and say, hey, what's going on? One thing I want to jump into, because you put this, and I really want you to help define this and share this before we get to the end of the show today. One of the topics you'd brought up, and you said, hey, let's talk about the importance of defining values and priorities and having a single goal. Or that's how I took it, was having a single goal. So how important is that? Is that something you get into the two things? Because I get away from myself here, and I don't want to forget. One, for anybody that's listening, if you want to connect with Dan personally on social, he is on LinkedIn, so you can look up Dan Capello. It's Dan and then Capello, Capello, and he's on Instagram as well at the official, not the at official Dan Capello. On Instagram. And then, as I mentioned before, his book is out. It's called Deliberate Evolution. And I wanted to mention that again as we talk about, sort of the importance of defining values and priorities and then having that single targeted goal. So can you expand on that for me and what do you mean by that? How important is that for us as leaders? How do we allow that to transcend past us into our people?
Right. Well, the whole premise of the book is there's 6 steps every leader must make to step into a life of success. And really, it's like, if you look at it, it's the success part is you have to be able to define that. And a lot of times we have goals. We have all these goals we want to reach, and it doesn't. Multitasking is a joke. You can't multitask, especially your goals. You have to have one overarching goal, and that has to be based on your values and your priorities. And the problem a lot of us run into is we never sit down, and if you build a foundation, you have to have your foundation is built on your values and your priorities. So if you never define them, you're never really going to be rock steady. And because a simple thing that I tell people, I start everybody that I work with is a simple. You take a piece of paper and you write down all your values, and everybody's like, "Well, I got this." It's like, no, there's 5. There's like your financial relationship, your job, your personal, your health, and you can add more. But there's like 5 or 6 in each one. Religion, whatever. But you write them all down, and there's got to be like 30 or 40, and you write all these values down.
Okay.
And then you start marking off the least important all the way down till you get to 10. And so you take those 10 and move them to the next column. And then you start by the most important to the least important, number 1 to 10.
Okay.
So now that you have that, now you take your top 3 and you put them in the last column. And that now you have your values that every decision you should make should be based on. And they're prioritized because you've already done all that work. So you've worked all that down. It's basically like the Olympic rowing team for the British. I think it was 1999. They had never won or had won since 1912, the rowing competition. And after they've got beat a whole bunch, they came up with one single question that was going to help them become the best they could be, because they weren't the biggest, the strongest, the fastest, or whatever. But they came up with one question. It's like, will it make the boat go faster? So they decided, it's like, if they're going to go out to the club, they have to take the question and put it against that. And it's like, will it make this boat go faster? And it's like, going to the pub, no, it won't. Or we're going to do this hard workout. And then you take that one question and you put it up against it. And it's like, will it make the boat go faster? Yes, it will. We're going to do that. And they did that. And in a couple of years, they beat everybody. They beat the Australians in Australia. And that's unheard of. And the Australians were huge, big guys and fast. But they beat them because they rounded everything down to one question. And if you can take your whole life and whittle it down to your priority, your goal, your value, all into one thing, man, what could you do?
I'm writing here, so I'll come back on the screen, but I'm writing that down because it's very powerful to me. It's because you're saying, hey, whittle it down just to the values and down to one question. So do you mind sharing what sort of thing, what is a question that you ask yourself when you're saying narrowing it down to one goal? What's Dan Capello's question?
will it help the people I want to help? Will it make me a better person so that I can communicate better to that person? It all comes down to, will it help me help others? And that's really the whole point. And it's like, what I want to help others with is what I've been through, because I've experienced. I'm not a perfect person. I am way past that. I'm on the other end of the spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
I was a very difficult person. I was an asshole. I was very good at it. But to actually
That was the badge of honor in itself, right?
well, but I mean, you see Gordon Ramsay and you're thinking, oh yeah, this is fake. It's like, no, that's G-rated in a real kitchen. It can get really ugly. So
it's crazy.
But yeah, in high-end kitchens, and in Europe, it's even worse. Like in Britain, it's like Gordon Ramsay. His mentor was Marco Pierre White, which was heroin, all this crazy, very attitude, obnoxious person.
Huh.
And
it's wild that it seems like every business you get into talking to different businesses and like that model of the world that you're talking about. Cause I've never experienced it. I haven't sat in that, but I know the businesses that I've been in, we go, oh man, this business is, you wouldn't believe it. And oh, this business. And so as you're talking about it, it's like, that's crazy to me. Cause it is, we see on that sort of persona on TV and you're like, no, man, that's real life. That's crazy. So one last question. I really like asking a lot of the people that are in leadership roles, and especially like you commented, you've had differences, different influences in the chef world and the leadership world. And I'm curious, could you give me, what are 3 defining characteristics of people that you would follow?
3 characteristics. Well, one of them is they have to be empathetic.
I get that.
They have to be vulnerable, and I don't mean in a negative sense. They have to be able to take the criticism. They have to, if you're going to critique someone, you have to be able to be critiqued. And a lot of people, if they can't be addressed or challenged, then they're better than us. And that's they're not going. Well, yeah,
better than us,
right?
Air quotes.
And they have to be adaptable.
I love that one. How about on the flip side? What are 3 characteristics that you say, man, I would never follow that person that displays this thing again?
Well, it goes back to they're self-centered, narcissistic. It's all about them. It's all about what they're going to get out of it. It's like, we're going to hit these numbers because I said we're going to hit these numbers, or whatever. It's my way or the highway. That's not a leader. That's a dictator. And to that sternness, but also someone who's you always say, it's like, if they're not kind to a dog or a pet, it's like, I don't want to be around that person, because they don't have, there's not that relationship, because you've got something that's there to help you or please you, or that's all the dog or cat wants is to be your, loyal, and you're not going to give that to them. So that loyalty thing, you can actually see that in a person, just how they, I forgot who said it. It's like, watch how they treat someone that can do nothing for them.
Mm-hmm.
How they treat the waiter, or how they treat the doorman or the janitor. It's like, if they can't treat those people good, I don't want to be around them, because that's a really big one, I think. And that's across the board.
I think especially from the world you come from, I've heard that it's I have a friend that said this on the show. He says, stuff like that is cliche until it's not, right? That there's a reason that they got to be cliche, but like you're saying, hey, watch how they treat the waiter. And somebody that'll treat you well and the waiter like crap is generally not a good person. It's because they want something from you. It's like you said, they're narcissistic, they're self-centered. So I think, All good. I love the empathetic, vulnerable, adaptable, and those are more and more common themes. I try and keep a list of characteristics, because I think that's something that is important for people to hear. If you're tuning into the show, and especially if you're a newer leader, you need to hear, because you may have not had the best example or the best mentor going in. You say, hey, this is what a leader looks like, is somebody that's pushing those numbers all the time. And it's like, yeah, you do need to get like, there is something to be said. You do need to get results as a leader, but how you get results is a real key thing. And that is through being empathetic. It is through being vulnerable, adaptable, understanding, listening, communication. I mean, we could go on for ages. And I think that there's just, I want people on this that are tuning into the show to hear those good things, that it's like, hey, embody that, because that's not what's just going to make you successful. It's going to make your people successful, and they'll help you succeed. That's how leaders, that's how you get the best leaders and how leaders win. So Dan, we're kind of coming to the tail end here. Do you have any final thoughts you'd like to take us out with? Any final words of wisdom you'd like to share, sir?
No, if you want to be a great leader, you have to give all the credit to the people that work for you, and you have to take all the responsibility for everything that goes wrong. Because if you don't take responsibility for what happens, then you actually lose power to fix those problems. When you take full responsibility for everything that happens in your life, you can do something about it. You're empowering yourself. And that's, a lot of people don't see that. They want to blame everybody else. It's like, no, it's my fault. Maybe yes, it's John's fault that he did it, but it's my fault for not making sure John was at a place where he could have succeeded.
Yes.
And when you start doing that, that's when you get the leadership, that whole, because leadership is not a title. It's a verb. It's
an action.
It's an action. It's not I'm the leader. It's like, I want to lead you. I want to lead us to this goal. And it's like, when you're in a company, even companies, they only have one goal. And usually they write it down. It's in the mission statement. And, where is your mission statement? What is yours? And how did you come up with it? And that's that exercise we did before, is come up with that personal mission statement and define your life by that, and
change your life.
That's going to be an epic story, especially if you start it young. I'm figuring all this out toward the end of my career, but it's actually starting a new career. But if I could have figured this out when I was 20 or 30, man, how far could I have really gone? I mean, what opportunities have I lost because I didn't? So
so true. I think back to my own career and my own life, and it's like, if I had just listened better when I was 30 years old, because 20, you're still figuring yourself out. At 30, I think we can get some people to tune in and open their ears and stuff. Same thing at 40, but like you, regardless of when you figure it out, take action and make moves. I think that's valuable, because people you said it earlier, you have a purpose. People have something to offer. So Dan, thank you for joining me today. As a reminder for everybody, you can connect with Dan on LinkedIn, Dan Capello. It's Dan, DAN, CAPELLO. And you can go to dancapello.com. Check out his book, Deliberate Evolution, as well. And Dan, just hang out in the wings for a minute while I take this out, if you don't mind. Thanks for joining me today, man.
Yeah, I appreciate it. It was a great time talking with you.
Yeah, absolutely. So with that, everybody, thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Leadership Toolkit. I appreciate you so much. As a reminder, we do this every Wednesday afternoon at 12:05 p.m. Mountain Time. That's 2:05 Eastern. And every single week, I have a new great guest to have a discussion with on what their journey in leadership is, what they can bring and share with you on what's been successful for them, maybe some of their failures, and helping you overcome so that you can grow yourself and grow the people around you. So I appreciate you very much. Make sure you tune in with us next week. If you've gained something out of this episode, please share this episode. Make sure and throw some thumbs up on it. I look forward to seeing you back here next week. And until we speak next, stay great. Talk soon, everybody.